Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 5B and House Rule 112H4, the Chair announces that he may postpone further proceedings today on any question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered. And without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Our first item for consideration is H.R. 598, the Taxpayers' Right to Know Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 598, to provide taxpayers with an annual report disclosing the cost and performance of government programs and areas of duplication among them, and for other purposes.
I ask that the unanimous consent that the bill be considered read and open for amendment at any point. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The bill's sponsor, Mr. Walberg, has an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill, and in the interest of time, I'd like to call up the amendment in the nature of the substitute and then yield time to Mr. Walberg, who can give a statement about the bill and the amendment in the nature of the substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 598, offered by Mr. Walberg of Michigan.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I'd now like to yield 5 minutes to, or recognize Mr. Walberg for 5 minutes to explain the legislation and the amendment in the nature of the substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Chairman and the committee for taking up consideration of H.R. 598, the Taxpayer Right to Know Act, which is a bipartisan bill that was introduced by myself and Representative Jim Cooper of Tennessee. The American people should know that their government does what their government does with their hard-earned tax dollars. H.R. 598 makes it easier for our constituents to evaluate federal government spending by requiring federal agencies to identify their programs, provide basic information like what the programs do and how they perform, and tell us how much they cost. Every business in America can tell you what their staff is spending their time on, the cost of their activities, and whether they are successful in reaching their goals. But we don't have that within the federal government. Now more than ever, agencies must do a better job of managing their programs and identifying areas where taxpayer dollars are not being used efficiently. Without better data, billions will continue to be lost. The Government Performance and Results Modernization Act of 2010 requires agencies to report all of their programs, related funding, and performance information to the Office of Management and Budget. OMB's current inventory is incomplete and provides inconsistent information. The Taxpayer Right to Know Act establishes a consistent definition for a government program and requires the publication of detailed information on each federal program. This information will allow taxpayers and federal watchdogs to better evaluate the effectiveness and utility of government programs. The Taxpayer Right to Know Act is an important and necessary step forward for government in providing programs that are accountable, that are effective, and that are efficient. The committee passed a similar version of this bill by voice last Congress, and it passed the House under suspension of rules. I encourage members to support this measure once again. Mr. Chairman, the amendment in nature of a substitute accommodates some concerns raised by OMB about feasibility. It's the same text as was reported out of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. I urge adoption of the ANS and favorably reporting H.R. 598. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes on any statement on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I wholeheartedly support substitute, and I would yield to Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. I appreciate the support of the ranking member, and even more than that, I appreciate the support of Mark Walberg, my colleague and friend. This is an important measure. As has been mentioned, it's already passed once. We need to get it passed by the full Congress. Thanks.
Thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill or on the amendment? Are there any other amendments to the amendment? If none, the question is now on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 598 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 2320, the Federal Improper Payments Coordination Act of 2015. Clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2320 to provide access to and use of information by federal agencies in order to reduce improper payments and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Hearing no objections, so ordered. The bill's sponsor, Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina, has an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. In the interest of the time, I'd like to call up the ANS, and Mr. Mulvaney will be recognized for his statement. Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2320 offered by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina.
I'd now like to recognize Mr. Mulvaney for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Chairman, about a year ago, in fact, almost a year ago, there was a news article about how much money we pay to dead people. We hear a lot of these stories, but it sort of caught my attention because at the exact same time, my uncle passed away, and I was the executor of his estate. And almost immediately after he died, I got a notice from the Social Security Administration saying, don't cash the next check, and if you do, you can get all sorts of trouble. And it struck me that there was something incongruous about those two things, that here we are hearing stories about all the money that the federal government pays to dead people, but I got a notice from the Social Security Administration almost instantly after my uncle passed away saying, don't cash the check. So what I learned was that some federal agencies do a really, really good job of tracking what we call improper payments, which I think is a euphemism for payments to dead people. I assume there's other types of improper payments, but some agencies do a good job with that and others do not. I talked about that on Facebook, and somebody sent me back a response and said, why don't you do something about it? And I said, okay, that sounds like a really, really good idea. So we came up with this bill. I want to thank Mr. Connolly, Mr. Cooper for their work on it as well, along with Mr. Carter. It does just a couple of things. It goes to that Social Security database, which is evidently a really good system, and allows more agencies to use it. In fact, it allows states to use it, state contractors to use it, the legislative branch to use it. It also extends the do not pay initiatives to things like states and contractors and the legislative branch. We pay money to people we're not supposed to. We don't do a very good job of tracking who's supposed to get the money. So what we've tried to do is figure out a way to only pay the folks we're supposed to pay by copying the systems that work and expanding the systems that work and expanding access to those systems across federal and state governments. There's also a minor provision at the end that requires the Treasury to track this and to tell us in the future how they are doing. I was extraordinarily happy that this is a bipartisan matter. I think a lot of people don't realize that as much as Democrats and Republicans disagree on the role of government, we tend to agree that we still want good government, regardless of what side of the aisle we are on. So not only am I thankful that Mr. Cooper and Mr. Connolly have joined me and Mr. Carter in doing this here, but there's a companion bill in the Senate that is bipartisan as well. So there's actually a chance that this small problem being $19 billion worth of improper payments every year, may get fixed. The amendment, the nature of a substitute, Mr. Chairman, is just some technical changes that my Democrat colleagues asked for, and I was more than happy to give to them. So I do hope I can count on the support of the entire committee, and that we can see support on the floor as well as we try and bring good government to Washington.
Thank you, the gentleman. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. First, I want to say to Mr. Mulvaney, I'm very pleased that you gave the Social Security some good words. Social Security is headquartered in my district. Many of my constituents are employees at Social Security, so I'm sure they'll be glad to hear what you had to say. Mr. Chairman, with nearly $125 billion of improper payments in fiscal year 2014, I believe agencies can do more to curb waste. The Improper Payments Coordination Act of 2015 is one of a series of laws in the last decade that attempts to curtail the hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars in improper payments. Building on 2012 legislation that codified the Do Not Pay initiative, H.R. 2230 would improve information sharing to combat improper payments. The Do Not Pay initiative is a central, comprehensive database of entities ineligible to receive federal funds. H.R. 2320 would permit states and the judicial and legislative branches of government to access the Do Not Pay initiative to verify payments or the eligibility of recipients to receive payments. The legislation would also require the Department of State and Defense to promptly and regularly report the deaths of Americans overseas to other agencies to prevent payments to deceased individuals. H.R. 2330 gives us additional tools to put our fiscal house in order. And if Mr. Cooper has comments, I know he's a co-sponsor, then I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? We're not, are there any amendments to the amendment? If none, the question is now on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 2320 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3089, the Grants Oversight and New Efficiency Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 3089 to close out expired grants and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Hearing no objections, so ordered. The sponsor of the bill, Mr. Walberg, has an amendment in the nature of the substitute to the bill. In the interest of the time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Walberg to speak both on the A&S as well as the underlying bill. Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3089, offered by Mr. Walberg of Michigan.
The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman and the committee for taking up consideration of H.R. 3089, Grant Oversight and New Efficiency, or otherwise known as GONE Act, which is a bipartisan bill that I introduced with my fellow colleague from Michigan, Representative Brenda Lawrence. The GONE Act takes common sense steps to ensure a more effective use of taxpayer resources by improving the grant management process. The bill requires federal agencies to identify thousands of grant accounts that should be closed out and explain why they have not already been closed out. When a federal agency awards a grant, it is required to create an account through its payment management system to distribute funds to a grantee. After the grantee is finished with the project or when a grant reaches the end of the grant award period, the grant account is identified as expired. The federal agency is then required to close out the account within 90 days of receiving all closeout documentation from the grant recipient. When an agency closes out a grant account, it essentially performs an audit to ensure grant funds were spent appropriately and to the terms of the grant award. The grant closeout process is a vital step to ensure taxpayer monies have been used effectively and for their intended purpose. It makes funds less susceptible to fraud, waste, and mismanagement, and may enable agencies to redirect resources to other projects. Unfortunately, the GAO has analyzed the grant closeout process and has found significant delays in the closeout process, resulting in costs to the taxpayer. At the time of the GAO's report, it identified more than $794 million in funding remaining in expired grant accounts. The GAO has also discovered that agencies were paying roughly $2 million in annual service fees to maintain grant accounts with $0 in them. The GONE Act seeks to address these long delays by requiring the heads of each agency to submit to Congress and the Secretary a report that lists each grant held by the agency, and identify which ones needing to be closed out. The bill also requires each agency to report within a year on whether or not they have closed out their grants. A bipartisan companion bill has already been approved by our counterpart committee in the Senate, and we have worked closely with our colleagues in the Senate throughout this process. This is a common sense, good government bill that will improve the grant management process and help ensure taxpayer resources are not languishing in expired accounts or being wasted to maintain accounts with nothing in them. The amendment in nature of a substitute clarifies that agencies are to send their reports on grant closeouts to the Department of Health and Human Services, which will ultimately report on this information to Congress, rather than have each agency send its own report to Congress. The ANS also makes several other technical changes to clarify the intent of the bill. And so, Mr. Chairman, I encourage members of the committee to adopt the ANS and favorably report H.R. 3089. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The bill before us, the Grant Oversight and New Efficiency Act, would require one-time reports from agencies on expired grants. The Government Accountability Office has found that expired grants are not always closed out properly. This is an important process that helps protect taxpayer dollars and ensures that they can be redirected where appropriate. The bill would require agencies to report to the Secretary of HHS and Congress on grants that have expired, explain why they were not properly closed, if that is the case, and make recommendations on which grants should be closed immediately. And I commend the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walbert, and I also commend Ms. Lawrence on our side of the aisle for her efforts with regard to this, and I would yield to her.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I just want to say that coming to Congress from being a mayor for 14 years, this is really exactly good government. It gives the opportunity for the taxpayers to have trust in managing these grants. They're sometimes the lifeline for local government. In addition to requiring the process of closing out these grants, it also allows our government to reallocate funds to other areas that, when grant applications are very competitive on a local level, and it is the lifeline. And this is something that I'm honored to stand with my colleagues in a bipartisan way to say that here in Congress, we need to make sure that on a local level, that our taxpayers and our government has the accountability. And I'll yield back saying that I am very honored to support this bill.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the amendment? The question is now on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 3089 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The next item for consideration is H.R. 1613, the Federal Vehicle Repair Cost Savings Act of 2015. Clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1613, to reduce the operation and maintenance costs associated with the federal fleet by encouraging the use of remanufactured parts and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I'd like to yield myself 5 minutes to explain the legislation. The Federal Vehicle Repair Cost Savings Act encourages agencies to use remanufactured vehicle components when doing so to reduce maintenance costs. In 2013, a GAO report found remanufactured vehicle components such as engines, starters, alternators, steering racks, clutches, etc., tend to be less expensive than comparable replacement parts. In fact, in a 2012 study, The study found that remanufacturing can result in a savings of 85% of the energy and material used to manufacture equivalent new parts. Further, this study found that remanufactured parts are on average 20 to 50% less expensive. Requiring agency heads to encourage their federal vehicle maintenance staff to use remanufactured components will reduce maintenance costs, which totaled $957 million in the year 2011 alone. That's the federal government having to deal with some 588,000 vehicles. Last month, the Senate passed companion legislation, Senate Bill 565, sponsored by Senator Peters, a Democrat from Michigan, and Senator Langford, the Republican from Oklahoma. I want to thank our colleague, Mr. Huizenga, for his work on this bill and urge my colleagues to support this piece of legislation and cost savings. Now I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm a strong proponent of saving taxpayer dollars wherever we can, while ensuring that the federal government buys quality products. For this reason, I support the Federal Vehicle Repair Cost Savings Act. This legislation would require the head of each federal agency to encourage the use of remanufactured vehicle components if doing so would reduce costs while maintaining quality. The intent behind the bill is to raise awareness of the option of to use remanufactured parts and inform agency fleet managers of this cost-saving option. Use of remanufactured parts would be encouraged by principal leadership at each agency, but would remain at the discretion of fleet managers. According to March 2013 GAO report, federal agencies spent $975 million on their repair and maintenance in 2011. The report also found that remanufactured vehicle components tend to be far cheaper. For example, the Postal Service and the Department of Interior informed GAO that they rely on remanufactured vehicle components to reduce costs. I also commend Representative Bill Huizenga and Senator Gary Peters for introducing the legislation. This legislation passed the Senate by unanimous consent last month, and I hope we can work together to move this bill forward in a bipartisan manner in this chamber. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real briefly, I commend the authors of this legislation and echo the sentiments both you and the distinguished ranking member just had. Like our friend Ms. Lawrence, I served in local government for 14 years. This is the kind of practical sort of thing we do all the time at the local level, and I'm glad it's finally reaching the federal level. So thank you for bringing it up, and I hope the bill passes. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully support this bill as it will encourage agencies to use the most cost-effective maintenance options for our federal fleets while maintaining a high level of quality and safety. I believe this is a good step toward reducing spending, saving taxpayer dollars, and working towards decreasing and eliminating our national debt. However, I believe this committee in the future should look into federal vehicle maintenance as a whole for even more cost-saving opportunities. For example, the U.S. Postal Service currently conducts maintenance on over 200,000 vehicles at 322 facilities. Moving this massive operation to private sector bidding could result in significant savings for the Postal Service. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request that my office work with the committee to determine the cost savings of eliminating all non-defense vehicle maintenance by the federal government and moving these repairs to a private sector bidding model. I hope we can work together to start determining the most responsible way to protect taxpayer money. Thank you, and I yield my time.
Thank the gentleman. Thank you for his interest, and the committee does look forward to working with you and any others who have interest in this topic. It is an important one. We're talking about significant dollars, and appreciate the gentleman's interest. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If there are none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 1613 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The next item for consideration is Senate Bill 136, the Gold Star Fathers Act of 2015. The clerk will designate the bill.
S. 136, to amend Chapter 21 of Title V United States Code to provide that fathers of certain permanently disabled or deceased veterans shall be included with mothers of such veterans as preference eligibles for treatment in the civil service.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I yield myself 5 minutes to explain the piece of legislation that's before us today. A bill that is sponsored by Senator Wyden, Senator Brown, and Senator Collins. Under current law, mothers of certain permanently disabled or deceased veterans received preference for hiring for civil service positions in recognition of their sacrifice. The preference applies when the mother is widowed, divorced, or separated, or if the husband is totally or permanently disabled. Senate Bill 136 extends the benefit to fathers as well. It also grants preference in hiring to parents who never married along with those that are widowed, divorced, or legally separated. The bill would expand the pool of people eligible for federal job preferences, but would not change the total number of federal jobs available or the salaries paid to federal employees. CBO estimates that implementing the legislation would not have any significant effect on the federal budget. Senate Bill 136 passed the Senate by unanimous consent in May. We owe a debt of gratitude to our veterans and the mothers and the fathers of our veterans. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation and glad that we're marking it up today. Now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to support S-136, the Gold Star Fathers Act of 2015, a bipartisan bill that was introduced by Senator Wyden of Oregon last January. It passed the Senate by unanimous consent in May and is now being considered by this committee. The legislation also has bipartisan support in the House in the form of identical legislation, H.R. 1222, introduced by Representative Elizabeth Esty of Connecticut. Several members of our committee are co-sponsors of this bill. This is common sense legislation that would address an inequity in the treatment of fathers of certain permanently disabled or deceased veterans regarding appointment to federal service. Under current law, these fathers are not given preference in obtaining appointment to civil service positions, while mothers are. S-136 would update current law to extend this preference to fathers in recognition of their sacrifices. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H-136. It is the right thing to do, and the time to do it is now. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Right. I just have a question on this bill, and I don't know who could comment on it. It's, of course, a very good bill, and I, of course, intend to vote for it because it's something we should all support. I just wondered, looking at the bill, though, there's some parents who have almost no relationship with their children at all their entire life. Are we giving them a benefit under this bill?
The gentleman will yield. My understanding of this is there is an assumption that as the parent of a veteran, that they will be given preference. I see nothing in the bill that would predetermine or require somebody to determine if they're a deadbeat dad, what degree they've had a relationship. There are other laws and other things that I think we can do to help go after those deadbeat dads and some of those others that maybe aren't as worthy. But I think recognizing that the overwhelming majority of these fathers should deserve and be recognized with the same type of recognition and preference is the spirit in which it's done, but it does not solve every familial problem that there is out there.
Okay. Well, like I said, I intend to vote for the bill, but maybe we can clean it up by the time it gets to the floor.
Thank the gentleman. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting Senate Bill 136 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The next item for consideration is H.R. 3116, the Quarterly Financial Report Reauthorization Act. Clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 3116, to extend by 15 years the authority of the Secretary of Commerce to conduct the quarterly financial report program.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I yield myself 5 minutes to explain the legislation. The quarterly financial report, often referred to as the QFR program, began 68 years ago to collect and publish key data on American corporate financial results. Since its first development, the QFR program has become one of our nation's best economic indicators. It's primary source of data for the GDP and other top-line economic estimates. The survey allows us to measure large-scale sectors of our economy are doing. Authorization for the QFR program expires at the end of the fiscal year. I want to thank Representative Lieu for his sponsorship of this important bill and urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the legislation. Now I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The bill before us would reauthorize the quarterly financial report. This report has continued uninterrupted since 1947 and is a closely watched principal economic indicator used to estimate gross domestic product, the Federal Reserve's flow of funds account, and other official estimates. At this time, I would like to yield to Representative Lieu, the author of this legislation, for further explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Ranking Member, for yielding, and the Chairman for bringing up my bill to reauthorize this critical program. The QFR is conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau based on a sample size of 12,500 companies across a variety of sectors and provides timely, accurate data on business financial conditions for use by government and private sector organizations and individuals. The QFR program currently covers the GDP by surveying corporations in sectors such as manufacturing, mining, wholesale trade, retail trade, information, professional, scientific, and technical services. The Department of Commerce has stated that continuation of the successful QFR program is a top priority. It is one of the U.S. Census Bureau's most important economic indicator programs. Preserving this vulnerable source of business financial information is in the nation's interest, and the loss of the detailed information the QFR program provides would erode the quality of our statistical measures, significantly hinder policymakers, and degrade the decisions on which the vitality of our nation depends. If this program were not continued, the most current and comprehensive report on corporate financial activity and a valuable time series spanning 68 years would be lost. We also have validation for this program from the private sector. In a letter from the Small Business Administration, their chief economist wrote, "The QFR is the only viable publicly available source that provides sufficiently current data for the manufacturing, mining, and wholesale trade sectors. As such, the Small Business Administration, which serves the small business community, strongly supports the continuation of the QFR." The chief economist for Wells Fargo also wrote that Wells Fargo supports the QFR and that good decisions require good information. Mr. Chairman, I request that this committee and my colleagues, I request that this committee favor report this bill. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 3116 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. We're going to move now to the following post office naming bills under a unanimous consent agreement. We have consulted with the minority and have agreed to move these bipartisan bills expeditiously. I would ask unanimous consent that the committee favorably report the following bills to the House: H.R. 322, H.R. 323, H.R. 324, H.R. 558, H.R. 1884, H.R. 3059. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, pursuant to Clause 2L of House Rule 11, members will have 2 days to submit their views on the bills considered today. And I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the bills ordered reported today, subject to the approval of the minority. Hearing no objection, so ordered. If there's no further business without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.